You're watching this later. Hi, and welcome to the Facebook Live. I'm just going to quickly go to the Facebook group. Hey, everybody. Great to see you. And as promised, I am here to talk about cooking from scratch. So, welcome to the group. Any of you who are new and a little late, but Happy New Year. So, I wanted to talk about this because this is a topic that's been coming up really through questions and discussions in other groups. And also, some of you were part of the Healthy Through the Holidays free workshop that happened in December. And we talked a little bit about this. So I wanted to just follow up because I think it's so important that people know this, and also so that I can answer any questions you have to make cooking from scratch easier for you. So hi, everybody who's watching. And if you have any questions, I can see them. If I look, I'm looking right at my screen. I can see them right below the video. So be sure to post them there for me. And there's a slight delay, I think. So I'm about 20 seconds before when I see your questions. So don't worry if I don't answer immediately. I'm going to check periodically and answer them as we go. All right. So the first thing I just wanted to say is, I am probably older than everybody else in this group, or most of you in this group. And when I grew up, cooking from scratch was not such a strange thing, right? It was very common. And so it was just something that we all learned. I learned at my mother's knee, literally. I started cooking from scratch when I was like 6 years old. And it's just something that comes naturally to me. And if you are familiar with, oh gosh, what's his name now? I've completely lost his name. Social researcher who talks about how we become proficient. He talks about the 10,000 hour rule. And if anybody knows the guy I'm talking about, please let me know. But that we need to do something for 10,000 hours before we can become proficient about it. So for me, obviously, cooking from scratch, I became proficient quite young. But I know that for so many people today, cooking from scratch is not something that comes naturally to you and not something that you're taught when you're young. So basically, what we mean when we're talking about cooking from scratch is you are taking the base ingredients at their most natural, original level. So, like a whole apple, or if you're a meat eater, like a chicken or a hunk of beef, or um, nowadays we also consider cooking from scratch using specific ingredients that are a single ingredient, like white flour or sugar or butter or coconut oil or whatever. So it's something that basically has one ingredient on the label if it's in a package, and then you combine them to create food. And that, I think, is a really important distinction from something like using packaged or processed foods, because the meaning of processing at its most basic level is to alter that original format of something. So if I take a coconut and I pour the liquid out, like an actual coconut, not coconut that you buy already dried. And I pour the liquid out of that middle of that coconut, and then I scrape out the inside meat, and I dry that meat, and I let that liquid sit, and it separates into cream and water. I have processed that coconut. If I take an apple and I peel it and I core it and I cook it and I make applesauce, I have processed that apple. So obviously there are different levels of processing, right? Like the kind of processing we're going to do at home, though it's technically called processing, that's like cooking. Whereas the kind of processing that they do in factories, and when you buy Fruit Loops, those little neon colored circles that are combined with flour and sugar and all kinds of preservatives and chemicals and colorings, highly processed, right? So the idea is with cooking from scratch, you are eliminating so much of that processing. And for so many of us who are dealing with health issues, who have to be on restricted diets, it's the processing that really gets us. It's the additives, it's the altering of the original form of the food. So I try to live a life with minimal processing in my life with my food, and therefore I cook from scratch quite a lot. as someone with candida and chronic candida for a long time, I know that even the smallest thing can set off my symptoms. So I would say I cook, I'm going to say 95% of my food from scratch. And in the last few years, I've really added a lot more processed foods than I ever have before. So I will have things like um, bean flour pasta, which is technically a processed food. But mostly I'm cooking from scratch. So I want to talk about when I say cooking from scratch, it's not that you have to have those most basic ingredients. You can combine other things that are minimally processed to make food. So if I made a pasta dish, I might make a pasta sauce and use the pasta, and I would buy olives, which I, of course, didn't pick from the tree and cure. So there are certain things that we just consider more basic and less processed, and cooking from scratch means you're putting those together. It's the contrast between that and taking a can of pre-made spaghetti in the sauce and just pouring it into a pot and heating it up, right? Or even a jar of pre-made spaghetti sauce and taking the pasta and combining the two. That I wouldn't consider cooking from scratch. Cooking from scratch is when you take the base ingredients and you put them together to make a meal or a dish on your own. Okay, so I hope that distinction is clear. So what I want to talk about today is why is it so important, especially if you're dealing with dietary restrictions and you have health issues, why it's so important to cook from scratch. And I just basically mentioned what I consider one of the really most important reasons, which is you avoid a lot of the processing. And so why is this important? Well, in the end, what you're getting is a much better quality meal or food if you cook it from scratch. So, just as an example, I'm going to take the most basic example where, and I eat this stuff all the time. It is minimally processed, but even this makes a difference. And I'll show you why it's the difference between cooking from scratch and buying something pre made. So, when you're on a restricted diet, a lot of people will opt for things that are healthy, like nut butter or seed butter, which I do all the time. I love almond butter. I don't eat peanut butter because it's high mold, but I eat almond butter all the time. And just to be clear, I do buy the jarred stuff. I don't only make it from scratch, but I try to make my nut butters from scratch. Why? Because, and this applies to other cooking too, right? So I'm just using this because it's so basic that you would think, what could be the difference? My almond butter, the only ingredient in it is almonds, or roasted almonds or something like that. But if you look at making it from scratch, when I go buy almonds, and you can either buy them from the health food store in bulk, or you can buy them in a package, whatever. I usually try to ensure that my almonds are organic if I can find them and afford them. And so I want the quality to be good. So I can see how fresh those almonds are. Even if there's no date on them, I can smell them and see if they smell rancid. I can see how they look. Do they have any mold? Do they have any discoloring? And then I will toast them in my oven on a pan that I know I washed and is clean. I will toast them, and then I'll put them in my own food processor. I'll grind them up until they become smooth, basically. And if I want to, I can add a little bit of extra virgin olive oil to thin it out. I can add a little sea salt if I want to give it a bit of a salty taste. And I have almond butter that I can store in a clean glass jar in the fridge. If I buy almond butter, it's made in a factory. I don't know where those almonds came from. I don't know what they looked like before they got toasted. Um, I don't know how long they sat on the shelf before they got toasted. I don't know how long they sat on the shelf after they got toasted. Maybe the oils in those almonds are already starting to go rancid by the time they're making the almond butter. Maybe they overcooked them and half of them were burnt, and so they threw in small amounts of the burnt ones with the regular ones so that you couldn't tell in the jar, but you're eating that burned almond skin, which is a carcinogen once it burns, right? So that's just to begin with. We don't know how clean the equipment was, or the pans that toasted the almond, or how clean the equipment was that turned the almonds into almond butter. And very often these jars that have only one ingredient have to have a warning sign that says may contain traces of milk, eggs, wheat, whatever it is, because they're using the same equipment for the nut butter and other things. And we don't know how well they clean it in between. Then we don't know how long that almond butter sat at room temperature before they jarred it, and what they did with it, how long it sat in the jar. So these are all these tiny parts of the process that can go wrong, and not even wrong because there's nothing wrong with that. That's how it's made, but that can affect your ultimate health if you consume it, because you may be getting traces of rancid almonds, you may be getting traces of burnt almonds, you may be getting traces of bugs from the factory, because there's a certain level of bug bodies that are allowed into things like almond butter and peanut butter by law that are considered okay. You may be getting a mold, you may be getting other ingredients like milk products, wheat, and so on. When you buy the almonds yourself, you can see what's in them and you can cook them. So that's just something as basic as almond butter. So imagine now if you are buying a ready-made meal that has 20 ingredients in it. All of those considerations can be applied to every single ingredient. So not to gross you out, but you never know, right? So for me, it is just, I have much more peace of mind and my body feels better when I am making those ingredients and I wash the tomato myself and I know what's in it, and I cook from scratch. So that's going like really basic. You don't have to be that crazy. And like I said, I buy jarred things, I buy canned things. I try to keep my jars and cans to a single ingredient within. But sometimes I'll do things like the pasta, and it has bean flour. I don't remember what else. It might have something else in there. I don't think it does, but it's processed, and I'm okay with that. So it's really a balance, right? Like if you're doing, most people talk about the 80-20 rule. If you have 80% of your food from scratch and 20% that you're using packaged and processed things, as long as they fit within your dietary restrictions, then most people are okay with that. And I would be okay with that. So that's the first reason, is it's just better quality if you cook from scratch. Um, the other thing that's just really important right now, when so many people are dealing with financial difficulties, is cooking from scratch is actually way more economical. So I buy sometimes, we get these bags of apple chips. So all it is organic apples that have been sliced and dehydrated. And again, that's technically processed, so I'm sort of dealing with all those same considerations, but it's a clean product, and because I don't eat it all the time, it's fine, whatever. I have a dehydrator. I can make those myself if I want to. And if you do a price comparison of, the final half a pound of dried apple chips, the price is probably somewhere around 5 times as much. If you buy the apples, you slice them up, you dehydrate them, or you buy the bag. Now, the difference for me is, at the moment, I'm not willing to put in that kind of time, right? Because so often what we're weighing is either more, something is either going to cost you more time or it's going to cost you more money. For me right now, because my time is so precious and limited, I don't have the time to cut up my apples and dehydrate them. And so I don't, because there are many other things that I do in the dehydrator. But if you're willing to put in the time, you are almost always going to save quite a bit of money. So it's the difference between making your own tomato sauce from scratch and buying tomato sauce, those kinds of things, right? So inevitably, whatever you're making from scratch is going to end up cheaper and more economical than what you can buy in the store. And often, if you're cooking from scratch and you know how to cook, you can buy things on sale in bulk and then make some dishes and maybe freeze them and keep them for later. So you're going to end up saving money if you're cooking from scratch. And the other thing that I think is so interesting, for me, cooking from scratch always tastes better, right? Because it's fresher and I know exactly what's in it and I can adjust it the way I like. So if you're someone who hasn't cooked from scratch a lot, the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and also the more fun it becomes, because cooking can also be something that is a creative outlet. And the more you do it, the better you can improvise. So it becomes a real asset to be able to cook from scratch, especially in times like this where you may not be able to get to the grocery store as often as you like, and you may not be able to run out for that one ingredient that you're missing the way you used to be able to do, right? So at the beginning of COVID, when we didn't know that we would be able to order our groceries online. So I have not gone into a grocery store since COVID started. We order online and we pick up curbside. But I didn't know how this was going to work. And I don't know if you, of course you remember, but in the beginning when there was like no toilet paper and stores were running out of ingredients. And so I would place an order and I couldn't get everything that was on my list because they didn't have it in the store. And as someone who has been cooking from scratch for so long, I am able to play with the ingredients I have. So it allows you to improvise and make use of what you have because you know which foods go together and which things you can combine and which things you can experiment with. And so I was putting together all these really kind of unusual, new and different meals for us based on what we actually had on hand, even though it might not be something I'd ever put together before. So you don't always need to stick to a recipe if you're cooking from scratch over time. You can learn to experiment. And if you want to see more of that, I do this on Instagram all the time. I will share when I'm cooking and I might say, oh, well, I tried this today because that was in the fridge and I mixed it with this. And it's something completely bizarre. Just as an example, the other day I had made, it's a Sweet Life Club recipe called Addictive Kale Pate. And it's just a raw kale pate. It's yummy. And I had also the night before, again, an experiment. I often will make cauliflower rice at home. Again, if you compare the price of buying cauliflower rice and making cauliflower rice, there's no comparison. And all you need to do to make cauliflower rice is grind up your cauliflower in your food processor until it looks like rice. Put it in a nonstick fry pan. I drizzle some olive oil on, some salt, and I just let it cook on a medium low heat until it's basically soft, and that's your cauliflower rice. So I'm often doing that, but I didn't have cauliflower. And I thought, I got this half a cabbage in the fridge. Let me see if I can make cabbage rice. And I did, and it was yummy. So the next day I decided to combine the kale pate and use it kind of like a pesto with the cabbage rice. And I coated the rice in the pesto, and I heated it up and I threw in some crumbled tempeh that I had made again a few nights before. And it was one of the most yummy lunches I've had in months. It was delicious. And of course, I never would have thought to put that together if I was constructing my meal from scratch. But I looked in the fridge, that's what I had. And I thought, yes, these will go. And that's part of what happens when you cook from scratch over time. You can play with your food that way, it becomes play. So the final benefit is you always have something to eat because you always know what to do with the ingredients in your fridge or your pantry, and you feel much more comfortable about combining them together. So cooking from scratch is, I think, an asset in so many ways, and particularly if you are dealing with food restrictions, because it allows you to create recipes where maybe you didn't have them before, and you're not always relying on these prepared and packaged foods that, while on the label they may say candida friendly or keto friendly or sugar free or fat free or whatever they may say, when you look at the ingredients, you're actually dealing with a whole host of processed artificial ingredients that may not be that good for you. So just as a last example, I'm a member of several groups online for people with candida, and the thing that I would say out of all the questions, one of the ones that comes up most often is an image of some product that says sugar free or whatever. And the question is it okay to eat this? And people will, in those groups, will look at the ingredients and they might see. So I'm going to just say something that I bought this week. I bought an organic ramen noodle. So I haven't had ramen noodles in about 30 years. Now that's this organic brown rice and organic millet ramen noodle. I thought, I've got to try this because I can at this point, because I've been on the candida diet for so long that I can have noodles once in a while, even though they're refined flour. So someone might put that up and say, is this okay for the candida diet? And someone at the beginning stages might look and see brown rice, millet. Well, I'm allowed brown rice and millet. That's great. I can have that on a candida diet. But the fact is, because it's so highly processed and because it's using refined flours, for someone in the early stages, that is actually not a good idea because your body isn't yet ready to deal with something that's been processed and refined like that. And because it's refined, the GI or glycemic index, which is how quickly it raises your blood sugar, it's much higher than if you just ate millet or brown rice on its own. And so that's going to affect you if you're in an early stage of a candida diet, and it might affect your symptoms because it's going to raise your blood sugar. So the specific individual ingredients alone is not always enough to know whether a packaged or processed food is okay for you. You always have to consider the fact that they are combining this in a factory with other ingredients. It's refined, it's highly processed. It may have other additives that are not good for you. And even if on the label it doesn't, like I said, there are often these traces of things that we can't necessarily know about exactly what they are that are in the food. So always the best idea to cook from scratch. And, going back to that balance between the money and the time, it's worth the extra time if you're dealing with health issues. So it may mean taking a little time away from something else that you do in your day and devoting that to cooking and learning to cook from scratch. And once you do, it's actually so much fun. I really find cooking fun. And over the years, I've kind of enlisted my husband's help. And so at the beginning, he was basically just a sous chef. So I would say, here's an onion, chop it up for me. And he would do that. And I remember at the very beginning, like he had never cooked before. My husband lived in an apartment for 2 years and he turned the oven on once in 2 years. So he had never cooked before. And it was in a few months into our relationship where we were doing this every night, prepping dinner together. And at one point he said to me, this is really nice. I never realized how nice it is to it gives us time to spend time together and talk to each other while we're prepping our meals. And I was like, wow, that was a unexpected benefit of cooking together. So it can be a social time and it can be a time where you actually have fun with food and play with it and think of it as a creative endeavor, just the way that you would paint a painting from scratch. You can create a whole meal from scratch. All right, everybody, that was a lot around cooking from scratch. So I hope that was helpful. Please let me know and let me know in the comments if this was useful for you and if there are other topics you would like me to cover. We got a new year, a whole bunch of new topics. I plan to be spending a lot more time in this group with you guys this year. So I would love to know what will be helpful for you. Please let me know. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Talk to you soon.